Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Eric Anderson with Sedcor, and thank you for being part of our monthly business forum. We're continuing to offer these events via Zoom, and we appreciate you joining us as we transition to a virtual platform, hopefully temporarily. While we're offering these programs free of charge, we're very much appreciative of any support you can provide. We've tried to make that relatively easy and painless. There's a link on the screen here with the donation portal. Just go onto our events page and look for the education event donation portal. We appreciate your support for that. And now our program. First, because I always forget, we do have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. So please feel free to ask questions. We'll be monitoring that. We do often get a bit of traffic on the chat feature. We try to keep up with that, but there may be conversations happening in that makes it difficult to get your questions heard. So please use the Q&A to be sure that we're addressing your questions. And now our program. Many Sedcor members are facing the challenge of pivoting to a virtual workplace. We were asked to find a speaker who would help us navigate through these challenges. I have a feeling that my staff in particular was looking for assistance on how we can help deal with this. How can you maintain an engaged and happy workplace while working remotely? We've been doing, I think, a great job, but there's a lot for us to be learning from, and I'm looking forward to hearing this as a office manager here too, so team manager. Also, how can you maintain that happy workplace for people that are working remotely, as well as how do you keep the team going and the engagement going when you're in the workplace and you're having to deal with the various COVID-related guidelines that are like social distancing, etc. So our speaker today to help address some of these questions is Thomas Lehman of Cascad Global. His passion is to help build work cultures that promote human flourishing. His background includes a marriage and family therapist and an Ivy League MBA by training. Go Big Red, I feel obliged to say that. Not too many fellow Cornell graduates around here, so I appreciate that. His background is systematic psychology, philosophy, and business, and he uses that background to create transformative training and engagement experiences. He co-founded Cultivato Global in 2014, helping to grow a two-person training company into a multinational consultancy with an international team of 15 professionals. Earlier this year, Thomas returned to his Oregon roots and embraced a new adventure as a leadership development manager at a leading online retailer here in Oregon. He founded the Leading from Home interactive webinar series to help transition more than 1,000 phone sales agents from working in that kind of office setting to working remotely, how to keep them engaged, motivated, as well as continuing to fuel companies' growth. So he's got some firsthand experience here with businesses that have had to pivot into a major change of workplace for their employees and still manage to grow significantly. So I'm very pleased to have Thomas Lehman joining us, and I'll be taking notes as well as all of you to hear what he has to say. So Thomas, thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Eric, for that kind and detailed orientation there, the introduction. Appreciate it. And also, thank you to all of you for making time today to focus on what I think is a very critical topic for our time right now, the special situation that we face in the world today. So appreciate it. A lot of folks that I know from different walks of life are making it today, and I hope some of the ideas that we're going to talk through are going to be useful and things that you can plug and play in your professional lives. So the idea today is really what we are facing is the challenge to create functioning, engaged teams in the socially distanced situation that we're facing today with COVID. A little bit of background. he's already given more background than you really need, but I'm the guy there in the middle back in the days when we used to wear ties for conversari. Those days seem a long time ago. I don't really know anyone who wears a tie anymore. I was not in finance. But we had a great team, and our focus has been to upgrade people for the future of work. And in a way, as these are very difficult times for many people in how we're managing with the COVID, both with the health concerns itself, and then with the impacts on the economy, all of those elements, they can be very difficult. But at the same time, they are also, we see it as an opportunity to fast track some of the changes and develop some of the know-how and the skills around working from home, working in remote settings that in a sense are almost inevitable. They're just being accelerated now. So we do see an opportunity there. Shout out to some of the team behind me in what we do and how we do these things. Very international team back in Mexico City. So start real quick. We've already heard the intro in terms of my background and all of that, and this isn't about me so much as it is the ideas. But I'll give you an example of what motivates me, and so that makes sense why I'm here and why I'm so excited to be sharing this with you. So it's my passion to cultivate workplaces, cultures where everybody feels, first of all, safe to be able to share vulnerable truths. We'll talk a little bit later on about the importance of creating that kind of psychological safety, both for operational needs and for human needs. And then energized to innovate, uh, and speaks for itself, and then inspired to live their purpose through the role they play, whatever that role may be. So that's what drives me, what brings me to this work, and what brings me to share what it is we're going to spend the next 45 minutes on. Quick note before we jump into more of the content, please love to have this be as interactive as possible. So do share your questions. Look forward to getting them at the end. If somebody has a clarification question that relates to the content and the flow, please shout that out to me somehow, Jen or Eric, so that we can pause and make sure we don't go over that. Other content questions, especially around your specific context, happy to handle that at the end. All right, so where are we going today? The first step, let's look a little bit at what work in the age of COVID means. It doesn't need a lot of introduction, we're all living it, but just what that experience is for some of the different kinds of stakeholders we have. And then we'll zoom in on that second part, engagement and social connection, especially on the role that social connection plays in engagement and building engaged workforces. And then a little bit on creative ways forward. How can we build that kind of engagement? How can we create the conditions for social connection in a situation, in a frame of social distancing? It is possible, not easy. There are challenges involved, but it's possible, and we'll look at some of what those are. And then we'll get to your concerns, and hopefully we get to hear a little bit more about the diversity of contexts that we have in our audience today. So work in the age of COVID, what's that all about? Well, we're not in Kansas anymore, all right? The world that we had just 1 year ago, I'm sure for all of you, you have that experience sometimes. You look back and you imagine, if we rewound 1 year ago and walked into a supermarket now and saw everybody wearing masks, all of these differences that have happened in such a short amount of time, it's pretty overwhelming in some ways. And that affects us as humans, and it affects us as workers, and really the two unite in us, right? So we're going to look at two parts of that. The first is the social distance part, what that means, and then also psychologically what the speed of the change and the uncertainties have meant for the way that we relate to the work that we have, both in the state of Oregon, beyond the state of Oregon. What does that look like? What does work with social distance look like? Well, there's really two kind of categories, and there's really three categories, to be honest, and it's important to remember that. Both of these categories are in the fortunate bracket, the bracket that's fortunate enough to be able to continue their work. in this time. There's also a third bracket, of course, many people, millions across the country, who are not that fortunate, whose means of employment is not there at this moment. So we're going to focus on the others without forgetting the first. So for those that have been able to continue their work, it's not the same, all right? And it's not the same in one of two ways. One is uh, a lot of what we call the office jobs have moved to working from home, right? So the office is now the Zoom office, right? Like if I wanted to, I wouldn't have to wear pants. I do, but um, that's part of the game now, right? We live, the separation between work and home environments is now no longer there unless we create it with certain artificial thresholds or doors, which are helpful, but it's not there structurally. So that carries a few specific challenges, right? We got kids, we got pets. Certainly, childcare would be at the top of for many. Managing school while they're managing work at the same time; those are enormous challenges. Technical challenges, unequal access to internet and technology. I'm in rural Oregon now. We do the best we can with what's available, but what's available is limited. Beyond that, though, and the reason why they're red is because that's we're going to shift our focus to more of the human lived experience that comes more from the psychological perspective that I bring to this. Is managing team anxieties becomes challenging, more challenging than it was before, because we don't see faces, we don't interact with people in the proverbial water coolers or the interstitial spaces that we have built into workspaces. Cascading information becomes more challenging. When you rolled out an idea, if something wasn't clear, you would either see it on people's faces and you could go over and explain it. You know, the mid-level managers could read that and go in and explain it. Or people would, you know, grab you as you rounded the corner somewhere and you could have those levels of clarity. Well, now all of that has to be done deliberately or it doesn't happen and we risk misunderstandings. Staying connected to on-site neighbors. You know, there's research out there looks at innovation and how innovation is located in physical space. Uh, 6 feet is kind of the magic. So the people that spend within 6 feet of you, so your work neighbors, if you have a desk, if you're in an assembly line, it's the people next to you. Those are the people that you're not only talking socially with, you're engaging, exchanging ideas, and that's where the majority of ideas are hatched. So it's not workflow, it's physical space. How can we create those opportunities for innovation if physical space is replaced with a virtual space? So then engaging self and others virtually and building community virtually, obviously, right? So that's really the key of the challenge and the focus of today, how we can do those things, because obviously when we don't see faces, when we don't run into each other through the chance of a shared physical space, we either get really deliberate around it, we create structures and systems that bring us into contact, or we suffer, and I would say the majority of that, we suffer the loss of those social connections, and that's really a huge loss, which we're going to look at here in a second. So that's for the, we call the quote unquote office or the white collar roles that can travel, that can be done from home. Many of that, you know, if you're a firefighter, you can't exactly, you know, firefight via Zoom. If you're a dentist, you can't do that, although there's some practices that can be done that way. So a lot of the work out there still has to be done in person. The nature of that, however, has changed dramatically. PPE, the challenge, I face this, my mother's a dental hygienist. The level of protection now have to wear doing that kind of work is dramatically changes the way that that work is experienced. So there can be safety concerns, you know, am I going to get sick? Am I putting myself in danger? Another, it's uncomfortable, it's sweaty, it's challenging. There's fatigue due to some reduction, not really with the regular masks so much, but with N95s and higher levels of security, there is some level there. And then again, the part that we're going to really zoom in on, not so much the structural as the experience, part of that, and that's the interruption of social interaction connection patterns, and how important, when we analyze the impact to work, we often think, oh, can we keep production going? What are the numbers, the sales, the stock price, all of that element of work. What we often don't see, because our KPIs don't measure those things so clearly, what is the effect on the lived social experience of things like staggered breaks, not being able to see each other's faces and smiles, uh, more distance that doesn't allow you to rub elbows quite literally and exchange your life and share your life in the same way. Life certainly got a lot lonelier for work that may have been always challenging in the nature of its work before. So those are some of the challenges we face. We're pretty aware of that, but not always about that human side, and that's what we're going to focus on now. So along with the shift to the changing nature of work, there's also what we have right now, incredible levels of uncertainty and anxiety around not knowing what the next, what the end game is. Will there be, some will there be a vaccine? Will there be other treatments available? Will there be a reduction that allows us to open up and move on? Uncertainties around the environment, around the economy. All of those things also weigh on the way that we do work, and they're magnified by the distance that happens when we're not able to ping each other's emotions off of visible faces. So what did those look like? Some of you may recognize those now in your workforces, in your families, in yourselves, without requiring you to out yourself. But common human responses are going to be emotional outbursts, reactivity, or withdrawal, depending a little bit on your personal style, trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating, and then the attempted solutions to that, which include rituals of control, cleaning, organizing, online shopping, washing hands, substance abuse. I mean, you can go on eating. We call it the work from home, or the COVID-15, the COVID-20, wherever you are with that, right? So we recognize these things. They have affected the way we do our life. Well, they also dramatically affect the way we show up in our workspaces. And if we're not conscious about that as leaders, we're going to have some interpersonal problems, challenges in management and leadership. Well, we'll go quickly. This isn't so much a science-focused lecture, but the idea here is really we have, for those of you who know Daniel Kahneman's work, Thinking Fast and Slow, we really have two mental systems: the rational, deeper thinking system, the slow thinking system. That's how we solve complex problems with our neocortex. And then we have a system that is designed or optimized with its fight, flight, freeze method for surviving highly stressful moments. The problem is, when we have a lot of stress in the environment and a lot of uncertainty in the world, we tend to spend more of our time in that flooded, reactive state than we do in the deep, slow thinking mode. And that has implications for health and those type of things. Also for our ability to really think deeply and think critically. So as leaders, it's our job also to create the conditions that allow people to get out of the unflooded state and manage these challenges in a more productive way. That's a big, quick picture of what we're facing. Intuitively, we feel that we have our own experiences related to that. But what does that do? How does that relate to the concept of engagement? And why is engagement and the connection aspect of that so important? Well, engagement, we'll start off with a definition. Engagement is a state of being. Those of you who are aware of or have heard of flow state from the Czech author whose name I'm not even going to try and pronounce because it has way too many consonants. Flow state, you know that is a state in which things are happening naturally, in which we are both enormously productive, we lose sense of time, we become absorbed in our work. Well, that's the high end of engagement. If you look at companies like Google, if you look at companies that are high margin and require human innovation constantly, uh, they their human processes, their people processes are geared to creating the conditions for flow state to happen in work, and to find people who have habituated hanging out in that space, because that is where humans perform at a higher level than any other. All right. Other industries, I think, are catching up who haven't had the resources to be able to be that focused in the past. But what goes along with that? One is it's an in general engagement that's also not quite in the flow state, but more of a general state that we're in, involves an understanding of personal purpose connected to a company's purpose. So when we can connect what I do with how I earn my money, then the earning of the money becomes an expression of me and the values that I hold dear. For those of us who've experienced that, there's a sense of energy really that happens when that, and gratitude. The work doesn't feel like pushing a stone uphill in the Sisyphean sense, and it becomes something that we enjoy, and we're much more productive and much more attractive to other people, with implications for CX and creating cultures also. A feeling of connection and loyalty obviously goes along with that. And then acts of initiative, energy and voice and body going above and beyond, those are the symptoms of an engaged person. Uh, it's pretty easy to see somebody who's engaged and somebody who's not, right? I mean, we don't have to ask you which side of the screen is the engaged side. We all know what that is, and we all want that. Um, and some companies, some of us have found out how we can do that in the non-virtual world. And less companies have figured out how to do that in the virtual world. And that's really the cusp of if we figure that out, we unlock the future of work. So what's the implication of that? Well, it's not just a nice to have, all right? And this all goes to Gallup's workplace survey, a very deep dive study on workplace engagement came out last year. Enormous impacts of engagement on the bottom line, or on the metrics that impact the bottom line. Absenteeism, almost half the absenteeism rate, turnover, productivity, safety incidents. I mean, you name it, almost anything that you would want in terms of human safety, productivity, retention, all of those elements, you get it with engagement. So engagement is key to all of that. And also talent brand. If your best people come on site for an interview, or come into a Zoom call panel room with an interview, you can read the engagement level very quickly, and you can see whether or not it's fake or not. And you're not going to get the best people if you're not building a culture where that is endemic and part of the daily water that you drink. So then the question becomes, we want it, we need it, it has a business impact, it's worth investing in. How do we create it? What are the conditions necessary for engagement? Well, one of the keys, if you look at this also again from that Gallup poll, if you look at those, we can go through these. Someone has talked with them about their progress, and here's the difference between the engaged subset and the not engaged subset, or the correlation with people who've taken these. Someone has talked to them about their progress. So the role of a leader showing care and showing individual attention is critical about their progress. This is people development for those of us who are in that world, or with those current projects. They've been praised recently, recognition, right? So one of the most deflating things you can do is you perform, and you never, it never seems to go anywhere, and that breeds cynicism quite quickly. In in-person workplaces, these things still don't always happen, but they're much easier to do. Praise, if you look at, they've been praised recently, that can be done by an expression on someone's face as you walk by, or the thumbs up in the hall, and those type of things. The leading thing again here, when we move to the virtual world, is we have to be hyper conscious how we can do that, hyper focused on deliberately making recognition happen in our workplaces, or we're going to lose our best people. All right, opinions, voice, all of those elements too. But the part to highlight here really is care, that you have somebody, maybe it's a direct manager, maybe it's somebody else who's coming in to connect with you, who cares about what you do and is recognizing the work that you do. So that puts a high onus on the role of whoever your direct leader or manager is. Now, by proxy, if you're in a position where you get to affect the whole org, if you're doing that and your direct reports do that, and that cascades down, and you can create a culture of that. Culture is created through our example. Uh, in studies of the effectiveness of teams, 70% of the variance was determined solely by the manager of that team. Enormous impact that we have in the small circle of those people around us, which is good news, because as we get into the limitations of the virtual, it's much easier to handle a smaller group of people than it is always to create big systems that give people a sense of engagement. All right, and that launches kind of what we say the 3 R's, which are really kind of the core of what engagement is all about. First one I've mentioned already, recognition. Harvard survey 2013 looked at 550 executives and said, what is it really that drives engagement? The number one result was recognition given for high performers. It would be interesting to ask, the panel here, maybe somebody can respond later, what procedures do you have? What processes do you have for sharing recognition, and how do those translate now into the virtual world? We'll see a few from a sales example that was very much in a physical world, how we've been able to shift that into another. All right. Another is the big picture. So what again, a lot of these things get ironed out if you have physical proximity. If somebody cascades a message and only gives half of it, only says, hey, we got to do that because they're in a rush. And managers fall into that trap sometimes. Do this and make sure it's done by then. Without giving the sense of why that's important, and without giving somebody a chance to connect their personal sense of purpose to it, it can get ironed out in the hallway, right? Because you can ask about it, or if you see people that aren't motivated, you can go over and you can follow up with more context. If you don't see those cues, if you don't miss those cues, we're in trouble. Quick parable, those of you who don't know the Stonecutter's parable, it's one of my favorites. There's 3 people all doing the same work, sitting there beating stones, right? And guy goes over, asks the first one, what are you doing? And looks down, and the guy's, is heavy and smacking the stones, and he says, I'm stacking these rocks, breaking them and stacking them over there. All right. Asks the second one, who's kind of, doing it, more light, seems to be enjoying themselves. What are you doing? Says, oh, making these stones to build that wall, and it's got to line up over there and do the thing, right? And then the third one, singing, all the enjoyment you can imagine. You ask him, what are you doing? Same thing with the rocks. It says, building a great cathedral that will last for 500 years and bring pride and bring people to our city, make us famous throughout the world. It can be so easy sometimes to share that, and it can be so easy to miss the moments where we can share the bigger picture that allow somebody to give context to what they do. And those are things that we have to be more conscious of in the physical, when we miss the physical cues. Third one of those, it's a bit of a stretch to fit it in the R's, but it's really should be shared fun. So real fun, something, enjoyment, happy moments of levity where we get a little bit of dopamine, serotonin flowing in us. Those things do wonders for our energy levels, for our sense of belonging, all of those things. Here's the catch. They do wonders anyway, but the result is massively magnified if we can share them with others. And so the example here is from the fish market in Seattle, where they built a philosophy around having fun, throwing the fish, and involving the customers in the fun, and it becomes a thing. Before COVID, it became a thing. People will go there to see that and post TikTok videos of it. So the key becomes, how can we have those things again in the virtual world? The last one, and this is the one I really want to index a little more on, is relationship. And that's a sense of social belonging, a sense of social community that happens in our workplaces. Our KPIs, the way we measure what matters, woefully under index on this critically important element of what the work experience is all about and what drives performance ultimately. Study again, HBR, the value of belonging at work, found a whopping 56% increase in job performance, 50% drop in turnover risk, 75% reduction in sick days, where you wouldn't even think, direct relationship, if the person felt like they had a best friend at work, they had somebody that they could go to, they had somebody they look forward to talking to on their breaks. Well, guess what? All of that has been mediated through physical space, right? Those connections just happen. Some people, the extroverts among us, those that are comfortable enough in our own skin, who feel like we can reach out, will be able to maintain those relationships across physical divides because you're making the effort to do it. And many will not. And their performance and their experience is suffering. So what can we do to create conditions for those kind of connections to happen? That really becomes our key. Those of you who know Maslow's pyramid, there's a version of this related specifically to engagement, where you look at what are the basic things that you need. And this is especially important right now as we're in this COVID situation. The takeaway from that is, don't talk to me about self-actualization when I don't have a roof over my head, right? That's Maslow's main idea. The same thing goes here. If we're talking about finding meaning at work when people don't feel safe, that becomes a cynical kind of flippant conversation for most, right? And that's not the space, that's not the key to unlocking what you could say engagement endemically in your system. The key is you got to have all of those elements. So focus on the survival, focus on the security, uh, do those things at the structural level. Then we got to focus on the belonging part, and that's probably our biggest our biggest need in this space. How can we create senses of belonging, and then some of the meaning things also in the way we communicate. Rat Park, to drive the point home even more. Pretty famous study in the 70s. If you look at the 60s in behavioral psychology, there was a lot of rat lab, behavioral from Skinner's system. That was really what was happening and what we thought was the key to unlocking what human behavior is all about, because we're a lot like rats, right? Well, researchers said, but hold on a minute, there's something wrong about the way we're doing this study. And the study was this: they put water, plain water, and water with fairly high doses of cocaine in the cages with the rats to see if given the opportunity, will they develop addictive behaviors that go against their survival instincts. What happened? Absolutely, they did. These became cocaine addicted rats who would basically drink the cocaine water until they died of little rodent heart attacks. And that was, almost to a T, that's what happened. But there's a problem with that. And we recognized, wait a minute, these rats are in cages alone. And so that brought the idea of Rat Park. And if you Google this, is a great little TED talk that shows it in more detail, created this, did the exact same experiment with the two options, but created a different scenario for the rats in which they had friends, other rats, they had things, stimuli to play with and things like that. What happened? The rats tried the cocaine and they didn't go back. There wasn't that same need. And we see that happening now to a heightened extent as we're taking the social systems and the social elements out of our workplaces. We're finding higher rates of depression, finding higher rates of, just low morale, workplaces that are not so fun to be a part of anymore. And of course, also unfortunately, higher rates of suicide and those higher levels of destructive behavior. So part of the way to counteract these things is bringing in a shift of mindset. So that's why I'm indexing a little bit, hitting these points pretty hard on that. For those who one more point also is anywhere where communication is important, we have to recognize that the level of social integration, the level of trust that is there between the relationships we have at work, not only determines your sense of happiness and your engagement, it also determines the level, almost like an onion, the layer of communication that is shared in workplaces. So for example, if on the bottom there, if we barely know each other, the level of context that we're going to feel comfortable sharing is whatever you can Google basically, and not much more. Whatever you can find in the org browser, wherever that is that you are, and not much more. And if we have deeper relationships and we're creating cultures where those relationships can flourish in a virtual way, then we get a lot of this rich context that shows us what's really happening, what's really going on. The great organizations create, we call psychological safety as the foundation. This is Google's Project Aristotle, really found that was the number one key to developing high performing teams was psychological safety. With that psychological safety, people share a different level of candor in their information. They're also more free to take risks that lead to innovative breakthroughs. All right. That's making the case, and hopefully you're on board that we need to do this. But now, what is it that we can do? What is the way forward that makes the most sense here? The first of these I'm going to look at here is we have to communicate connection. All right. Uh, it's not enough, if we're on board, if we're the Kool-Aid is a terrible metaphor for that, but if we are bought in to the idea that we need to connect and it's worth it to invest in the engagement of our people, how do we do it? Well, the first is we've got to communicate with far more frequency than we think we do. Uh, so in the past, we've got to, the quick glance, the way we check in with people through our body language, through our faces. For me, it's strange. I do a lot of Zoom calls, including Zoom calls with about this number of people in my organization, uh, but it's never filtered through the webinar version. So I see their faces. So I can go out and as we're doing a talk like this, or we're doing some other material like this, I can get a more of a read of, oh, okay, we need to lean in more. There's, people are really looking, there's some nodding going on. There's, a tilt that says, give me more information. Or, if they're like, got it, and then they move on to something else, I know I got to move on. Well, that kind of level of body language communication happens if we're able to see each other, or if we are very conscious and we create systems of pings. So what are systems of pings? If you have Slack, if you have groups like that, create cultures around them. And I'm going to share some best practices from how we've done some of those things. What it really involved was before the big COVID explosion to home, we would have catching bowl chat rooms for certain topics. And because they weren't used as much, because a lot of it was happening around, they didn't need to be specialized. And so you would have, critical things that needed a manager authorization in with, hey, show me that picture of the thing you did yesterday, right? And all of that stuff was mixed into the same chat. What we found is we need to separate it because the volume's so high so that people can monitor just the critical, but then there's also the social that gets enough volume that it can drive some of the connective elements that are necessary. Over communicating rollouts and cascading becomes hypercritical. So the first, it coordinates all of our efforts. And if it's hard enough to be the coxswain that coordinates the efforts in person, well, guess what? When you don't see folks, you don't know if they're playing, if they're playing Call of Duty or something, or if they're engaged in their work. It's pretty hard to coordinate those efforts. So there's got to be a way to measure or build the trust so that you have enough pings that show you what people are doing. Then again, sharing the purpose along with that becomes even more important because we need every tool at our disposal we can to drive purpose. All right, ownership mindset. If we don't share clarity, enough clarity around the context, we end up with Rumi's elephant problem. Uh, Rumi, 13th century poet out of what's now Turkey, had this image of 5 blind men touching an elephant. Each one is touching one specific part and says, "Oh, I know what an elephant is. It's the one touching the tail says it's like a broom. The one touching the side, it's like a wall, right? And so on and so on." Well, which one is right? All and none, right? Everyone has a partial truth that is skewed because it does not take the greater context into consideration. Those misunderstandings get massively magnified as we can't ping each other in across the view in a boardroom or across the table when we meet, all of those elements. All right, critical also, I mentioned it already. Can we show up visibly, make a culture of this? Our organization, uh, entry level, we started off when we moved to work from home, working off of, we had to give everyone the laptop home, all of the material, account for it. It was a pretty heavy lift, but they did not have webcams at first, and leadership did. We pushed for, like, wait a minute, if you want connection, you want engagement, you can't see people's faces. You're having team meetings with people over months, and you don't know what they look like, if they've gone crazy, frizzy haired, mad crazy, or if they're not really paying attention and they're just kind of you know you need it. You need that extra point of contact, and it's worth investing in. How to do it, of course, we can index on that. Here's an example of the beautiful way to do it from a work we did with Cisco over in Europe. They'd have these wraparound videos that follow your voice so you can engage pretty naturally as a human. You can't do that everywhere, but we can try at least to not have um, the context get in the way. All right, recognize we're almost out of time. I'm gonna speed it up a little bit here. We're getting close to the end. So what are ways we can do that? And I'm throwing a lot out there. Hopefully something sticks and continues the conversation in your many ways that you can do that. Uh, Sharing calendars, virtual break rooms have been a big hit. They took a little bit to get started with us. Doing virtual happy hour around, that's a great way, for example, for work neighbors to get connected. Be patient with it would be the advice. At first, people might poo-poo it a little bit, but then if a critical mass starts doing it, the others don't want to miss out. They start hearing it's actually fun. It's like, well, what am I doing here alone in my room anyway? And then you create a different space where you have a beverage of your choice together, where you talk more freely without the pressure to get something done. It's been a lot of fun actually, and does a lot of good for that. So, leaderboards, things like that, competitions. If you're in sales, if you're doing, if you're managing a lot of millennials, young people, in whatever forum that you do, that games and competitions and visibly seeing those type of things are huge for engagement. So how can we move those things? That was basically a challenge in the first couple of weeks for us. How can we move our sales leaderboards and things like the bell that we ring when somebody makes $1,000 sale, those elements that build culture of performance? Because taking phone calls is tough, man. You need that kind of stuff. So we've been able to move those into a digital space a lot of emoticons. And then as a leader, you've got to drive acceptance of those platforms, repetition, refer to the platforms again and again, drop the link in. It's happening here. Let's go here. Where we're going to, yeah, in the meeting, we got to do it here, right? It takes a while to get those things established because they're artificial at first, but over time it does. And now we're having quite a lot of look with those things. Also bringing in things like best image awards that are not only performance related is critical. We did a workspace cribs competition. We did a pets competition. We did a threshold competition. Like, what's your way of separating workspace from other? And it was hilarious. People said, I found I can reset my whole day by going out the back door, coming in the front, starting over again, or putting tape on the ground and say, these things happen in the taped space, these things don't, those type of things. All right. We'll make sure we got enough time for this. I'd say the one critical thing I'd like to close in, and this is related to the way we deal with change too, um, left to ourselves, our minds tend to index on the negative and go into kind of sad, lonely, depressing spaces, or angry and I want to get out of here spaces, avoidance spaces. That's how it is for most people. The social impulse of, especially good leaders who can help kind of create the environment around them, uh, those those effects get magnified in physical space, and we have to find ways to do that when we share only virtual spaces. Mindsets are critical. The first thing we can do is bringing a sense of the mindset into our conversations. Regular team meetings have things like rituals that happen all the time. When we bring into that space, create a safe space to talk about things like mindset. What do you do to stay negative? Like, man, today I felt like I didn't want to shower. I stayed into my PJs. That set me up for this whole negative thing. It happens. Creating a space, if you can talk about that with your manager, with your team, uh, the solution is in that, right? Then you're on the way out. But if those things are happening only privately, they tend to spiral downward. So that's really on that line, really. And this is the closing before we go into your questions. Is spinning this whole COVID thing for us is, we choose our mindset around it. Yeah, a lot of it sucks. I had 1 week in my new workplace, excited to get to know people, build new friendships, and I was moving back to the US. So, create a new life for myself. And then off to, you know, purgatory, stuck in this lonely home, without contact with other people. So there's a victim mentality can happen around that. But then you can switch it. You can say, hey, look, this is the future. The future is going to be separating from doing the work physically, because that allows all kinds of freedom to be where we want to be in the world, and cuts out the need for expensive office infrastructures. That's the way the future. It just happened faster than we wanted it. We have a chance to build ways to really do that. Let's lean into that and get it done. It's an exciting time to be involved in this kind of work. So that's the mindset I try to bring in, and looking forward to engaging with some of your questions and where we can go from here.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Really interesting conversations or topics, particularly now. I think we can all relate to various pieces of what you've been talking about one way or the other. I was just on a board meeting this morning, and just as I unmuted myself to talk, UPS person came, dog goes crazy, 50 people on the call, on the Zoom call, start to chuckle, whatever else. A year ago, that would have been horrific. Now everybody just kind of laughs it off and says, oh yeah, I've got the kid problem, I got the dog problem, I've got, whatever problem. So I think we've all had to adapt whether we know it or not.
Right, it's part of our shared life, right?
Yeah.
When we look back, and maybe the beginning of the way things are from now on.
We did have a couple questions come up here.
Sure.
One, uh, Are you aware of any studies that directly relate to this education? There's a close, what you were talking about was is closely aligned with someone has, what they've been reading and seeing for students with some modifications, and wondering if you were aware of any data associated with that from education world.
It's a great question, and I would say I welcome the partnership, because I think both the private sector, the business world, anybody who's dealing with adult learning and adult engagement um, is facing similar situations to a higher degree when you're dealing with children, that you need special ways of engaging. I don't. In that, I would put myself more as an eager learner, and I would welcome the contributions I think that educators are going to be making at this time in finding solutions to what must be pretty painful problems that require solutions right away. So I don't have the answers. I wish I did, but I think teachers are going to tell us a lot more about how we can manage adults, my guess, faster than the other way around.
So another question here from Abashan, our team, for companies that who find that they're drifting toward undesirable cultural impacts due to distance among workers, what are the first few things they should do to try to right the ship?
Well, I'd say it's a case by case basis. I would say anytime you're engaging with something like that, it's the success is going to be a factor of the level of trust among the participants, because that's only then are you going to get honest information. Chances are you got to do it, some kind of announcing something, but then you follow up in one-on-ones where there's a lot of listening, there's a lot of validation of some of the challenges, and it can sound and seem exhausting, especially if that hasn't been done in the past. There's a lot of pent-up, uh, you know, complaint sessions that you're going to have to listen to a little bit, with the faith that on the other side of that, or with a little bit of coaching, we also get into something constructive that we can do. That's the best I can say, and always more difficult, but not impossible. Use video will help a lot in managing. Whenever you manage conflict, you want all the channels of communication that you can have in the room, if possible. Email's the worst. Only audio is second bad, and if we can see each other, it's a little better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I had one question come up in the chat. It's actually a good question also, I think. Do you think the outcome of this new COVID interactions will positively shape office interactions after the pandemic has ended, or will we go back to the old normal as we all return to the workplace?
Wow. I think I would take that as it's up to us, and what we make from the opportunity. Going back in quite the same way, I don't think will happen, but we can easily slide back into the negative interactions, or you know it depends what we make of this opportunity. If we build a way to really create connected, strong cultures that give people a sense of belonging and purpose and alignment in doing good work going forward, when we come back to physical spaces, that's only going to get magnified and celebrated, and there'll be a sense of freedom, like the hot desking, a new version of hot desking, right, where your HQ doesn't have a desk for everyone. It only has a desk for 40-60% of the people at a time, because the idea is, oh, John's taking it from Tahiti today, or this type of thing. There's that fluidity in space that will happen.
I know we've talked with local businesses that are beginning to understand how it impacts them from an HR perspective for new hires.
Yeah.
Before it was, looking at the Portland Metro down to Eugene for workers, and now all of a sudden it's like, well, if we're all going to be working from home anyway, somebody can call in from Boston or remotely from points beyond. So it's starting to make an impact there as well, kind of, employer mindsets, I think.
Oh, there's going to be huge implications, sure. Also for salaries, right? We're seeing that. We're seeing Silicon Valley salaries that are set for Silicon Valley cost of living. Like, well, we're in virtual world, why don't I live in Oaxaca, Mexico and have, be a king, right? Well, there's clamping down on that because it's not sustainable. So there's adjustments all around.
I will cancel my real estate appointment in Mexico then. That's unfortunate. Did have somebody else that shared your experience with starting at a new company, starting a new job just before going remote, and actually a lot of our several colleagues here in the region that we work with in economic development have started during this process, and we've only ever seen them, kind of their headshots in conversations. So, can you go a little bit deeper into navigating that? How tricky that can be both for the employee as well as the employer?
Sure. I think again, like not to make a mantra out of it, but it requires us to be deliberate in our relationship cultivation. There's a whole module that we're building out right now around stakeholder co-elevation. How do we do those things? Certain parts, we have a culture of what's called the coffee chat, where you invite somebody to a chat without an agenda. It's usually capped at about half an hour because we also have to work. But there's a culture of if you get invited to one of those things, you don't say no, right? Maybe you move it, but you don't say no because we want there to be that openness to do those things. Psychologically, it requires, we have ingrained, it reminds many of us of that moment where you had to walk across the dance floor and ask somebody to dance and they're like, oh gosh, what if they say no, right? And those things happen much more organically if you just bump each other in the hall, in the break room or so. Well, sorry, but we got to be, we got to find a way to make it happen, or we're going to, drift into lonely, ineffective space.
Just one quick, maybe not that quick a question, but I know this must depend on the size of the employer. But I was just wondering what your thoughts were on, businesses, employers with like the importance of a written policy around working remotely as opposed to, just kind of pivoting and doing your best.
Well, from the policy side, I think you'll find far more qualified people to speak intelligently about that. That's the first answer. And then I think you'll need that in certain ways of risk management and things like that, having clear accountability structures for many people, they're used to performing with a boss watching them, and that's part of the way they perform. You take that away, there's an adjustment period, and some will not be able to do it in the first round. We lost quite a few sales agents in the shift because they couldn't adapt to the work from home, or there were some other areas. Hopefully they landed somewhere else. The new hires are only those who apply into being able to manage that way of working, and they've been great.
Well, thank you, Thomas. I very much appreciate you joining us today and sharing your expertise and your passion for this work. And we're all kind of learning as we go. So it's nice to have both some tips for things we should be thinking about, as well as some reinforcement of some gut instincts that we kind of jumped on board quickly with as we've pivoted. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. And I would, the call to action for me is let's keep this conversation going. Feel free to reach out to me. I love looking at this stuff. I would love to learn from others in their other contexts. What are they doing that's working well, either in the physical world, which I don't have as much interaction with, or also in the virtual world? What are some other best practices? So we can all develop this and create those spaces that we feel good inhabiting and look forward to showing up in.
Oh, it's fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll take you up on that and keep you in our loop, and you please do the same. We do have a save the date for kind of our next opportunities to get together virtually, November 18th. November, December become kind of busy times for all of us, but we're going to try to continue some interesting programming going into the holiday season. Once again, thank you for coming today and participating and logging in. If, as a reminder, we do have, we thank you for your support. And if you do have the opportunity, please check out our website and help donate to the cause so we can continue to bring in great speakers to share their expertise while we're all meeting remotely. I do want to take the opportunity, given the subject matter, to really thank the SEDCOR team. I've been very pleased to see how all of us have really done a great job of pivoting. I know there's varying degrees of need to connect personally, but I think we all appreciate the ability to at least once or twice a week get together as a group online and see each other's faces, and hopefully, but I've just been, for folks that are members and other folks, just be aware of how the SEDCOR team, I think, has just been incredibly productive and responsive to all these issues going on, and I've been very appreciative of that. And I think our partners in the field too, with whether it's our cohabitants of the CCBI building, like the SBDC and Willamette Workforce Partnership, but we've just had some really great connections and connectivity as a result of having to pivot. So we're trying to put this kind of advice into practice at SEDCOR also with our employees and our partners. Thank you very much for your time today. We look forward to seeing you virtually in the future. Thank you once again for your support. Take care. Have a good rest of the day.